Have you ever been told you don't belong, even when you've worked your whole life to be there? Imagine standing at the cockpit door, your uniform crisp, your credentials in hand, your dream within reach only to be denied because of the color of your skin. That's what happened to Captain Selena Ward, a black pilot who had climbed every rung of the ladder, trained harder than most, and carried herself with dignity, yet was stopped cold by prejudice. In that moment, Selena had a choice to walk away in silence, or to confront a system that had failed not just her, but every passenger who trusted that airline. What would you do if the very place you earned through sweat and sacrifice suddenly told you, you don't belong here? This isn't just about flying a plane. It's about dignity. It's about courage. And it's about the cost of silence versus the power of truth. Stay with me as we journey through her story, a story that begins with rejection and ends with justice. If this moves you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so more people can hear stories that remind us what dignity and justice truly mean. The morning news cycle was on fire. Every major channel carried the same headline splashed in red across the bottom of the screen: FAA grounds Aerosky Airlines, effective immediately. Cameras panned across airports from Atlanta to Denver, showing passengers stranded in endless lines. Some were shouting into phones, others sat on their luggage in silence, children dozing on parents' laps. Gate agents looked overwhelmed. Flight information boards lit up with one word repeated over and over: canceled. At Chicago O'Hare, a reporter's voice shook slightly as she spoke live viewers. What you're seeing right now is unprecedented. Aerosky Airlines, one of the country's largest carriers, has been grounded nationwide. All flights halted. All aircraft ordered to remain on the ground. The FAA cites serious systemic violations of safety protocols. This comes after explosive testimony yesterday from one of Aerosky's very own pilots. The camera cut to a photograph. A woman in her late 30s, hair pulled neatly into a bun, stood in uniform. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry either. Her eyes seemed steady, even after weeks of scrutiny. Under the image, the caption read, Captain Selena Ward, whistleblower, back in Birmingham, Alabama, where Selena had grown up. Her grandmother sat in a recliner chair, clutching a worn bronze pin shaped like a pair of wings. The old woman whispered, almost to herself, "Baby girl, you finally did it." Across the country, millions of strangers asked the same question: who was she? And how did she bring down a billion-dollar airline? The story didn't begin with chaos at the airports. It began with something smaller, quieter. A locked cockpit door, a moment of humiliation. 3 months earlier, Aerosky Flight 417 was scheduled to depart Atlanta for Denver. The morning rush was in full swing. Passengers hurried down the jet bridge. Flight attendants smiled through the fatigue, and Captain William Drake was already seated in the left seat, running pre-flight checks. Selena Ward, assigned first officer that day, walked briskly toward the cockpit. Her uniform was sharp, her ID badge clipped neatly, flight bag in hand. She reached for the cockpit handle. Before she could step inside, Drake's voice stopped her. "Not today," he muttered, blocking the entrance with his arm. Selena froze. "Excuse me, Captain." "You heard me," Drake said without looking up. "This isn't your place." It was subtle enough that someone standing nearby might have thought he meant something procedural. But Selena knew better. She had flown long enough, endured enough sideways comments to recognize the sting behind his words. The narrow hallway felt tighter. Behind her, a flight attendant glanced over, unsure whether to intervene. Passengers filed into the cabin, oblivious to the exchange. Selina swallowed, fighting to steady her voice. "I am the assigned first officer on this flight. You know that." Drake leaned back in his seat, finally meeting her eyes. His tone was calm, almost casual. "Assignments change. Go wait in the cabin." For a split second, Selina considered arguing. She considered reporting him right then, but she also thought about the consequences, the whispers, the retaliation, the way complaints often disappeared into thin air. So she did what many before her had done. She stepped aside. That day, she rode in the cabin, wearing her uniform, listening to the announcements as if she were just another passenger. The humiliation burned hotter than the jet engines. Fast forward to today. That single denial had spiraled into something much larger, an avalanche of truths buried deep inside Aerosky Airlines. Standing outside the FAA building in Washington, D.C., Selina faced a wall of microphones. Reporters jostled for a closer angle. The late September sun glinted off the marble steps. She held a thick folder in her hands. Evidence compiled over weeks' maintenance logs, internal emails, testimony from crew members who had seen too much. A journalist shouted Captain Ward. "What do you say to those who claim you acted out of revenge?" Selina's voice was calm, steady, but each word landed with weight. This was never about revenge. This was about safety, about dignity, and about the truth. Inside, officials were already briefing Congress. Aerosky's CEO Thomas Caldwell was nowhere to be seen. Vice President of Operations Margaret Sloan had resigned overnight. The entire industry was holding its breath, and it all began with that locked cockpit door. The question lingered in every viewer's mind. How does a single pilot, one black woman who was told she didn't belong, end up grounding an entire airline? The answer required going back not just to the day she was denied entry, but to the childhood dreams, the sacrifices, the choices that led Selina Ward into the sky in the first place. The story of how she became both a pilot and a whistleblower was not just about airplanes. It was about power, prejudice, courage, and the price of telling the truth. And for those stranded passengers watching their flights disappear from the departure boards, it was about something even bigger: trust. Long before the microphones, the cameras, and the controversy, there was a little girl lying on her back in a patch of Alabama grass, eyes fixed on the streak of white across the sky. Selina Ward grew up in Birmingham, not far from the airport. Her family's modest house sat beneath one of the approach paths, where jets thundered overhead so low that the windows rattled. For some kids, it was just noise. For Selina, it was music. She would sprint out of the house, drop flat on the grass, and watch until the silver speck disappeared. Her grandmother, the one who raised her, would often step out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "Selina, baby, don't you get tired of looking up there?" "Never," the girl replied, squinting at the disappearing tail. "One day, I'm going to be in that sky." Her grandmother would smile, though her eyes always carried a shadow of worry. She knew what the world was like for a black girl in Alabama who dared to dream beyond the ground. Still, she encouraged it. One day, she came home from her shift as a janitor at the airport with something clutched in her fist, a small bronze pin shaped like pilot wings. She had found it near a trash can, left behind by some hurried traveler. She cleaned it up and handed it to her granddaughter. "Keep this," she said softly. "Whenever the world tries to tell you no, you remember your place is up there." Selena held the pin like it was treasure. She pinned it to her school backpack and never let it go. At school, her dreams were not always welcomed. In third grade, when her class had career day, Selena stood up in front of a poster she had drawn of a plane. She declared, with all the confidence of an 8-year-old, "I'm going to be a pilot." The classroom erupted in giggles. One boy in the back muttered, "Girls can't fly planes." Another added, "Not a black girl." The teacher tried to hush them, but the sting had already landed. Selena's face flushed, and for a moment she thought about sitting down, about saying something safer like teacher or nurse or secretary, the roles people expected. But she didn't. She lifted her chin and said louder, "I will fly. You'll see." That defiance carried her through the years, though it wasn't easy. High school brought more subtle doubts. Guidance counselors nudged her toward practical careers. Airlines are expensive, they warned. Maybe try something more realistic. Aviation mechanics, maybe. That's still good money. Selena nodded politely, but at night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening for the distant rumble of engines, and promised herself she wouldn't settle. Her grandmother worked overtime to help her buy books about aviation. Selena devoured every page Bernoulli's Principle: lift, drag, thrust. She memorized plane models the way other kids memorized baseball stats. She could tell a 737 from a 757 just by the nose shape. There was one summer when her grandmother saved enough for a special gift, a 30-minute discovery flight at the local airfield. Selena was 16. She wore jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled into a tight ponytail. The Cessna 172 smelled faintly of fuel and leather, and when the instructor handed her the yoke for the first time, her hands trembled. "Easy pressure," the instructor said. "The plane wants to fly. Just guide it." As the aircraft lifted off the runway, Selena felt her chest expand in a way it never had before. The houses below shrank, the roads turned to lines, and the horizon stretched wide. She felt free, weightless, infinite. When they landed, her grandmother was waiting by the fence. Selena ran to her, nearly breathless. "I have to do this. Grandma, this is who I am." Her grandmother cupped her face in both hands. "Then you will. But you'll need more than wings to fly. Selena, you'll need strength, you'll need patience, and you'll need to know that the world won't always clap when you take off." Those words stayed with her, carved deep inside. To afford flight lessons, Selena took on every job she could. She bagged groceries, cleaned houses on weekends, and later waited tables at a diner near the interstate. Tips went into a coffee can under her bed, labeled Flight Fund in thick black marker. Some nights, exhausted from double shifts, she wanted to quit, but then she'd look at the bronze pin, gleaming faintly under the lamp, and remember why she was working. College applications brought another round of discouragement. One admissions officer, after hearing her plan to major in aviation, leaned back and said, "You know, this field isn't exactly diverse. It's competitive, cutthroat. Maybe you'd be happier studying business." Selena smiled politely, but inside she burned. Happier? No. Safe? Maybe. But I'm not here to be safe. I'm here to fly. She wrote her application essays with raw honesty. She didn't sugarcoat the challenges. She wrote about the boy who laughed in third grade. about the counselor who said, "Be realistic," about her grandmother who carried other people's trash so Selena could carry her dreams. She was accepted into a university program with a small flight training school attached. The financial burden was crushing, but scholarships and endless hours of work made it possible. During her first semester, she often biked miles in the early morning darkness to reach the airfield before classes. There were days when her hands were blistered from bussing tables the night before, yet she still gripped the yoke with determination. Her fellow students noticed her discipline. Some respected it, others resented it. Once, in a simulator session, a classmate muttered under his breath, "She's only here to check a diversity box." Selena heard it. She didn't respond. Instead, she poured her frustration into precision, landing the simulated jet smoother than anyone else that day. At night, she wrote in a journal. She didn't just document procedures and flight notes, she wrote feelings, doubts, affirmations. One entry read, "The sky doesn't know race, the sky doesn't know gender, it only knows lift. If I can master that, nothing else matters." And yet, she knew the world cared about those things deeply. She knew that every cockpit she entered would carry invisible weight. Still, when she looked at her grandmother's pin, she remembered who she was flying for, not just herself, but for the girl lying in the grass, for the woman who mopped floors at the airport, for everyone who had been told no. By the time Selena completed her first solo flight, circling above the Alabama fields, she no longer wondered if she belonged in the sky. She knew, long before the microphones, the cameras, and the controversy, there was a little girl lying on her back in a patch of Alabama grass, eyes fixed on the streak of white across the sky. Selena Ward grew up in Birmingham, not far from the airport. Her family's modest house sat beneath one of the approach paths, where jets thundered overhead so low that the windows rattled. For some kids, it was just noise. For Selena, it was music. She would sprint out of the house, drop flat on the grass, and watch until the silver speck disappeared. Her grandmother, the one who raised her, would often step out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "Selena, baby, don't you get tired of looking up there?" "Never," the girl replied, squinting at the disappearing tail. "One day I'm going to be in that sky." Her grandmother would smile, though her eyes always carried a shadow of worry. She knew what the world was like for a black girl in Alabama who dared to dream beyond the ground. Still, she encouraged it. One day, she came home from her shift as a janitor at the airport with something clutched in her fist, a small bronze pin shaped like pilot wings. She had found it near a trash can, left behind by some hurried traveler. She cleaned it up and handed it to her granddaughter. "Keep this," she said softly. "Whenever the world tries to tell you no, you remember your place is up there." Selena held the pin like it was treasure. She pinned it to her school backpack and never let it go. At school, her dreams were not always welcomed. In third grade, when her class had career day, Selena stood up in front of a poster she had drawn of a plane. She declared, with all the confidence of an 8-year-old, "I'm going to be a pilot." The classroom erupted in giggles. One boy in the back muttered, "Girls can't fly planes." Another added, "Not a black girl." The teacher tried to hush them, but the sting had already landed. Selena's face flushed, and for a moment, she thought about sitting down, about saying something safer like teacher or nurse or secretary, the roles people expected, but she didn't. She lifted her chin and said louder, "I will fly. You'll see." That defiance carried her through the years, though it wasn't easy. High school brought more subtle doubts. Guidance counselors nudged her toward practical careers. Airlines are expensive, they warned. Maybe try something more realistic. Aviation mechanics, maybe. That's still good money. Selena nodded politely, but at night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening for the distant rumble of engines, and promised herself she wouldn't settle. Her grandmother worked overtime to help her buy books about aviation. Selena devoured every page Bernoulli's principle: lift, drag, thrust. She memorized plane models the way other kids memorized baseball stats. She could tell a 737 from a 757 just by the nose shape. There was one summer when her grandmother saved enough for a special gift, a 30-minute discovery flight at the local airfield. Selena was 16. She wore jeans and a t-shirt. Her hair pulled into a tight ponytail. The Cessna 172 smelled faintly of fuel and leather, and when the instructor handed her the yoke for the first time, her hands trembled. "Easy pressure," the instructor said. "The plane wants to fly. Just guide it." As the aircraft lifted off the runway, Selena felt her chest expand in a way it never had before. The houses below shrank. The roads turned to lines and the horizon stretched wide. She felt free, weightless, infinite. When they landed, her grandmother was waiting by the fence. Selena ran to her, nearly breathless. "I have to do this. Grandma, this is who I am." Her grandmother cupped her face in both hands. "Then you will. But you'll need more than wings to fly. Selena, you'll need strength, you'll need patience, and you'll need to know that the world won't always clap when you take off." Those words stayed with her, carved deep inside. To afford flight lessons, Selena took on every job she could. She bagged groceries, cleaned houses on weekends, and later waited tables at a diner near the interstate. Tips went into a coffee can under her bed, labeled Flight Fund in thick black marker. Some nights, exhausted from double shifts, she wanted to quit. But then she'd look at the bronze pin, gleaming faintly under the lamp, and remember why she was working. College applications brought another round of discouragement. One admissions officer, after hearing her plan to major in aviation, leaned back and said, "You know, this field isn't exactly diverse. It's competitive, cutthroat. Maybe you'd be happier studying business." Selena smiled politely, but inside she burned. Happier? No. Safe? Maybe. But I'm not here to be safe. I'm here to fly. She wrote her application essays with raw honesty. She didn't sugarcoat the challenges. She wrote about the boy who laughed in third grade, about the counselor who said be realistic, about her grandmother who carried other people's trash so Selena could carry her dreams. She was accepted into a university program with a small flight training school attached. The financial burden was crushing, but scholarships and endless hours of work made it possible. During her first semester, she often biked miles in the early morning darkness to reach the airfield before classes. There were days when her hands were blistered from bussing tables the night before, yet she still gripped the yoke with determination. Her fellow students noticed her discipline. Some respected it. Others resented it. Once, in a simulator session, a classmate muttered under his breath, "She's only here to check a diversity box." Selena heard it. She didn't respond. Instead, she poured her frustration into precision, landing the simulated jet smoother than anyone else that day. At night, she wrote in a journal. She didn't just document procedures and flight notes. She wrote feelings, doubts, affirmations. One entry read, "The sky doesn't know race. The sky doesn't know gender. It only knows lift. If I can master that, nothing else matters." And yet, she knew the world cared about those things deeply. She knew that every cockpit she entered would carry invisible weight. Still, when she looked at her grandmother's pin, she remembered who she was flying for, not just herself, but for the girl lying in the grass, for the woman who mopped floors at the airport, for everyone who had been told no. By the time Selena completed her first solo flight, circling above the Alabama fields, she no longer wondered if she belonged in the sky. She knew. Selena Ward's early training years became the crucible that shaped her into more than just a student of flight. By the time she was accepted into the university's aviation program, she already carried the grit of someone who had worked twice as hard for half the recognition. The air smelled of jet fuel, the whine of engines cut across the Alabama fields, and every day she biked before dawn to reach the airfield with her backpack heavy against her shoulders. She learned quickly that flying wasn't just about physics or procedures. It was about patience, humility, and the will to rise again after every stall, every mistake. In the beginning, Selena was nervous, even timid, with her instructors. Her voice wavered when she read checklists aloud, but over time, the yoke began to feel like an extension of her hands, the throttle like a heartbeat she could steady with her own. She learned to sense the wind shifts before the gauges confirmed it. There was a moment, one crisp autumn morning, when she guided a Cessna through a crosswind landing, that her instructor, Captain Harold Bennett, finally looked at her with something beyond approval. Bennett was a retired Air Force pilot with lines of wisdom etched across his face and a presence that commanded attention without effort. He had flown fighters overseas and taught generations of cadets, but he treated Selena with a seriousness that surprised her. "Ward," he said one afternoon, leaning against the wing of the training aircraft, "I've seen plenty of students come and go. Most have skill, some have luck. You've got something harder to teach resolve." Selena nodded, clutching her logbook. She wanted to thank him, but her throat tightened. Praise was rare, and from Bennett it felt like a medal. Still, not everyone shared his view. Some peers whispered that she was out of place, the same words she had heard since childhood. One student rolled his eyes when she beat his landing score in the simulator. Another sneered, affirmative action wings. The sting was sharp, but Selena had learned to channel the sting into focus. Every insult became fuel. Every doubt became determination. Her first solo flight was more than a rite of passage. It was a declaration. The day was bright, the air calm, the runway shimmering under the sun. She taxied nervously at first, whispering to herself as if her grandmother could hear, "You've worked for this. You belong here." When the wheels lifted off the ground and the Cessna climbed steady, she laughed out loud, a sound of freedom carried on the wind. Alone in the cockpit. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a pilot, but triumph was followed by challenge. Advanced training demanded long nights of study and grueling sessions in the simulator. The instrument rating nearly broke her resolve flying by gauges alone. In a world of clouds and dials, with no horizon to trust, many students failed. And there were nights Selena sat in the dorm bathroom crying quietly, the weight of fatigue pressing her down. She wanted to quit. She wanted the sky to be easier. It was Captain Bennett who found her one morning, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. "You think flying's about control," he said gently, "but it's about trust. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. And most of all, trust that you've earned your seat. Those words anchored her through the fog of instruments, through the disorienting spins, through the fear of failure. And when she passed her check ride, the examiner's simple nod felt like the world had opened wider. To pay tuition, Selena took on more jobs, night shifts at the diner, cleaning offices, even tutoring younger students in math. She lived on instant noodles and black coffee, sometimes choosing between gas for her bike and a textbook. Yet, through it all, she never stopped writing in her journal. One entry, after a sleepless week, read, "The sky doesn't hand out mercy. You fight for every foot of altitude, and that's what makes it worth it." During these years, she also began to encounter the subtle weight of being one of the few black women in aviation spaces. At conferences, older pilots sometimes assumed she was there as a volunteer, not a trainee. When recruiters visited campus, their questions to her were softer, patronizing, as if doubting her seriousness. But Selena carried herself with quiet dignity. She didn't argue. She proved them wrong in silence, in flight hours logged, in ratings earned. Graduation came with a bittersweet mix of exhaustion and pride. She walked across the stage in her cap and gown, her grandmother cheering louder than anyone, clutching the bronze wings pin in her hand. Bennett shook Selena's hand firmly. "Now go find a bigger sky," he said. Her entry into the airlines was not immediate. Like many new pilots, she paid her dues at regional carriers, flying small jets on short routes. These were the years that taught her resilience in the face of relentless schedules, weather delays, and passengers who barely noticed the person guiding them safely through the clouds. She learned to navigate icy runways in Denver, thunderstorms in Dallas, and endless nights on standby in Atlanta crew lounges. Once, after a particularly grueling week of back-to-back flights, Selena sat in the quiet of a hotel room staring out at the city lights. She thought about her grandmother, about the boy in third grade, about every voice that said no, and then she whispered to herself, "Still flying." Those early years were the foundation. Every hardship, every moment of doubt, forged her into the kind of pilot who would one day face down not just storms in the sky, but storms within the very system meant to uphold safety. Because flying, Selena realized, was never just about holding a yoke steady. It was about holding yourself steady when others doubted, when fear pressed in, when the system itself seemed determined to clip your wings. By the time Selena Ward earned her place at Aerosky Airlines, she had already logged thousands of hours in the cockpit of regional jets. Yet stepping into the gleaming lobby of Aerosky's Atlanta headquarters felt like crossing into another world. The marble floors gleamed, glass walls stretched to the ceiling, and large photographs of smiling pilots lined the hallways. To an outsider, it was the face of modern aviation diverse crews, polished branding, a promise of progress. Selena wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that the years of working double shifts, of carrying doubts and determination in equal measure, had finally led her to a place where her wings would be recognized without question. Her grandmother mailed her a card the night before her first flight with Aerosky. Inside was the bronze pin, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. "Wear this when you walk into that cockpit." Her grandmother wrote, "Remember who you are." On her first day, Selena met Monica Reyes, a flight attendant with quick wit and an easy laugh. Monica was the kind of colleague who noticed details others ignored: how passengers looked when nervous, how junior crew members carried tension in their shoulders. "You're the new first officer. "Right," Monica asked with a grin. "About time we got some fresh air in these cabins. Welcome to the circus." Selina smiled, grateful for the warmth. Her first flights went smoothly, paired with captains who seemed professional, even kind. They discussed weather systems, shared tips on approaches, and offered her coffee during long legs. Selina thought, maybe. She had finally stepped into the career she had imagined all those years on the grass, watching the skies. But it wasn't long before she crossed paths with Captain William Drake. Drake was a veteran with 3 decades in the industry, a man whose reputation carried weight in aerosky. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair silvered at the temples. Passengers often mistook him for the face of authority and experience, which he wore like a badge of honor. To many, he was a legend. To Selina, he quickly became something else. Their first meeting happened in the crew lounge. Selina approached, offering a respectful handshake. "First Officer Ward, looking forward to flying with you." Drake didn't return the handshake. He simply glanced at her, eyes scanning from her uniform to her face, before saying, "We'll see." He turned back to his newspaper. At first, Selina told herself not to take it personally. Pilots came in all kinds, and not everyone wore friendliness on their sleeve, but once they flew together, she saw more. He second-guessed her checklist calls, cut her off mid-sentence, and once even told a flight attendant within earshot. Back in my day, co-pilots knew how to stay quiet. Passengers sometimes mistook Selina for cabin crew, and while most captains quickly corrected them, Drake did not. Once, when a businessman looked at Selina and said, "Can I get another drink before takeoff?" Drake smirked and said nothing, letting the mistake sit heavy between them. Selina vented quietly to Monica after one such flight. They sat in a dark corner of the Denver layover hotel bar. "He treats me like I don't even belong in the cockpit," Selina admitted. Monica sipped her drink, shaking her head. "I've seen his type before. Old guard. Thinks the airline belongs to him. Don't let him steal your wings." Selina wanted to believe that advice was enough. She told herself she could endure, but the tension grew heavier with each pairing. Behind the polished image of aerosky, she began noticing cracks. Drake would joke about skipping waste-of-time checklist steps. Mechanics, pressed for time, signed off maintenance logs without thorough inspections. One afternoon, Selina overheard 2 crew members whispering about a hydraulic issue that had been logged multiple times but marked resolved without real fixes. When Selina raised a question during debrief, Drake brushed it off. "If you want to fly by the book every single time, you'll never get anywhere. This airline runs on efficiency. Learn that, or you'll burn out." The words chilled her. Flying wasn't about shortcuts. Flying was about safety, about precision. She remembered Captain Bennett's advice: trust your training, trust your instincts. But what good were instincts if the system itself was pushing against them on another flight to Dallas? Turbulence rocked the plane. Selina held steady, scanning instruments, while Drake chatted casually with the purser over the interphone. When they landed, he complimented himself on 30 years of steady hands. Selina bit her tongue, knowing she had been the one managing the yoke through the worst of it. Still, she stayed professional. She greeted passengers, reviewed logs, kept her logbook meticulous. At night, in hotel rooms, she sat by the window writing in her journal, wrestling with her doubts. "I wanted to fly to feel free, but some days the cockpit feels like a cage built of silence and pride." The turning point came during a 3-day trip beginning in Atlanta. Selena walked toward the cockpit, her ID badge visible, flight bag in hand. Drake was already seated, adjusting knobs. When she reached for the door, he lifted his arm, blocking her entry. "Not today," he said. The words landed with the weight of every no she had ever heard. Selena froze, her hand still on the handle. "I am the assigned first officer," she said evenly. Drake looked at her with that same detached calm. Assignments change. "Go wait in the cabin." Passengers shuffled past, oblivious. A flight attendant lingered nearby, eyes darting between them. Selena felt humiliation rising, burning her cheeks. The cockpit, her place, her dream reduced to a locked door. For a long moment, she thought about pushing back, about raising her voice, about calling operations, but she also knew the cost. At Aerosky, complaints often vanished into silence. Whistleblowers found themselves without schedules, without support. So she swallowed the hurt. She stepped aside. That day, she sat in uniform among passengers, listening to safety announcements, her wings glinting under the fluorescent lights. No one knew she belonged in the front of the plane. No one knew the humiliation gnawing at her, but Selena knew something else. That day, something inside her shifted. She could no longer ignore the cracks. She could no longer let silence define her place. She didn't yet know how, but she would find a way to make her voice heard. The morning after that humiliating flight, Selena Ward stared at her reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror. Her uniform hung neatly on the rack, pressed and ready, but her eyes revealed exhaustion she couldn't iron out. She touched the bronze wings pinned discreetly inside her bag. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Whenever the world tries to tell you no, remember your place is up there." But the truth pressed heavy. She'd been told no again, this time not by a classmate or a counselor, but by a captain she was meant to fly beside. It was different now. She was no longer a child dreaming in the grass. She was a professional, trusted with lives, trained for emergencies. And still, her competence was questioned, her presence reduced to silence. The next pairing with Captain William Drake came 2 weeks later. Selena felt the dread settle as she read the schedule on her tablet. Flight 732 from Boston to Dallas, with him in the left seat again. She reminded herself to remain calm, to do her job, to be professional no matter the provocation. In the crew briefing room, Drake skimmed the flight plan while Selena sat across from him. He didn't greet her. Instead, he barked out instructions as if she were an assistant, not an equal. "Fuel's already loaded. Don't waste time on the walk around. I've seen enough of those in 30 years. Selena frowned. "It's part of protocol. I'll handle it." He raised his eyes, cold and dismissive. "Suit yourself, but don't keep me waiting on the tarmac." She walked carefully around the aircraft, running her hand along the fuselage, checking for dents or leaks. At the landing gear, she noticed a faint streak of hydraulic fluid. She snapped a quick photo on her phone, then bent down to inspect it further. It wasn't a massive leak, but it was enough to raise concern. When she returned to the cockpit, she reported it calmly. "Captain, I found a hydraulic seep near the left gear. It needs a closer look before departure." Drake didn't even glance up. Maintenance signs off on those all the time. "It's cosmetic." "It's not cosmetic," Selena pressed. "If the line fails mid-flight, we could lose control surfaces." Drake sighed heavily. as if her insistence was an inconvenience. You want to delay a full cabin of passengers over a little stain? Do you understand what kind of costs that racks up? Selina held her ground. Safety isn't optional. The silence stretched between them, thick and tense. Finally, Drake growled, "Fine. Call maintenance. But when they tell you it's nothing, don't say I didn't warn you." Maintenance arrived 20 minutes later. The mechanic, Derek Cole, crouched under the gear and frowned. "Good catch," he murmured. "This line's overdue for replacement. Should have been flagged last inspection." Selina glanced at Drake, who turned his gaze back to the overhead panel, face stiff with irritation. The delay stretched over an hour. Passengers grumbled, flight attendants scrambled to soothe nerves, and Selina felt the weight of their frustration. But inside, she carried something else: validation. She had spoken up, and it had mattered. Still, the fallout came swiftly. After landing in Dallas, Drake filed a report accusing Selina of insubordination. Excessive delays undermined captain's authority. The words read, it was a strike against her record. She sat in her hotel room that night, staring at the report on her tablet. Anger tightened her chest. She had done the right thing, no, the necessary thing, and still she was punished. The following week, whispers followed her in crew lounges. Some avoided eye contact. Others smirked, repeating Drake's version of the story. Selina felt isolated, the invisible wall between her and her colleagues growing taller. Only Monica Reyes seemed to notice her struggle. Over coffee in a quiet corner of the terminal, Monica leaned in. "I heard about Dallas. Don't let it eat you alive. Selina, you did what you were trained to do? You probably saved lives." Selina sighed. "But the system doesn't see it that way. They see me as the problem, the one who makes noise, who doesn't fit in." Monica's eyes softened. "Sometimes the only way to fit in is to break the mold, but you don't have to do it alone." Those words stayed with her. She began to see the cracks, not just as accidents, but as patterns. Maintenance shortcuts, captains cutting corners, executives praising efficiency while silencing dissent. Each piece was a thread, and she felt them tightening around her. The first denial of her place in the cockpit had been a personal humiliation. This, though, was bigger. It was about safety, about integrity, about the silent culture that put profit above lives. Selina started keeping detailed notes in her journal, not just about flights, but about what she observed: the skip checklists, the maintenance irregularities, the subtle retaliations. She stored copies of logs on a secure drive, knowing one day they might matter. Yet each act of resistance came at a cost. Sleep slipped away, replaced by restless nights replaying conversations. She worried constantly about her career, her reputation, her future. She thought about her grandmother, who had sacrificed so much. Would she be proud if Selina kept her head down, or if she spoke up and risked everything one night after a particularly difficult trip? Selina sat at the edge of her bed, wings pinned in her palm. She whispered to herself, "You belong up there. But maybe it's not just about flying anymore. Maybe it's about making sure everyone's safe when they fly." It was the first time she admitted to herself that her fight might extend beyond the cockpit, that she might be called to stand not just as a pilot, but as a voice. The next morning, she ironed her uniform, clipped her badge, and walked out with steady steps. She was no longer the girl lying in the grass or the student doubting her place. She was a woman who had been denied, disrespected, and diminished and who had chosen not to stay silent. Selena Ward had grown used to the rhythm of airports, the shuffle of feet on polished floors, the calls echoing over PA systems, the scent of brewed coffee mixing with jet fuel. But lately, that rhythm felt discordant. Every gate, every crew room seemed charged with an undercurrent she couldn't ignore. She wasn't just battling one captain's disdain anymore. She was beginning to see fissures that spread far beyond her own struggles. It began with another routine flight, this time from Miami to Chicago. Selena arrived early, reviewing the flight plan, the weather reports, and the weight and balance sheets. When Derek Cole, the mechanic she had met in Dallas, appeared near the jet bridge, she was surprised. He carried a clipboard and a guarded look. "Ward," he said quietly, "you might want to check the cargo hold before departure. Something's off." Selena raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He shifted uneasily. "We've been told to sign off repairs we haven't done, shortages on parts, delays in orders. They're pressuring us to pencil whip the logs so the planes stay flying. Today, I refused to clear a valve replacement. 10 minutes later, another mechanic signed it off without touching the plane." Her pulse quickened. "You're saying there's a systemic cover-up?" Derek met her eyes. "I'm saying safety is being gambled for profit, and people like you and me, we see it. But we're the ones they'll burn if it comes to light." She thought about the hydraulic seep in Dallas, about the dismissive captains, about the whispers in crew lounges. It was no longer an isolated concern, it was a culture. On the flight deck, Captain William Drake was waiting again, his presence heavy with disdain. He didn't acknowledge her as she strapped in. Instead, he muttered, "Don't slow me down today. We're already tight on schedule." Selena bit her tongue. The knowledge of what Derek had just told her burned in her chest. She glanced at the maintenance log. Neat signatures sprawled across the checklist, each line marked, inspected, and cleared. Yet she couldn't trust it anymore. The flight took off smoothly, but her mind wandered. Each vibration, each flicker of the panel lights made her wonder if there was an unseen defect lurking beneath. After landing in Chicago, Selena pulled Derek aside near baggage claim. "Why tell me this?" she asked. He hesitated before replying. "Because you care about doing things right. Most pilots look the other way. You didn't. Back in Dallas, you made them fix that line. That meant something to me." Selena exhaled slowly. She wanted to trust him, but trust had become a dangerous luxury. Still, she nodded. "If you have proof, document everything. Keep it safe. We may need it." The weight of his words lingered. At her hotel that night, she scribbled more notes in her journal. Hydraulic leaks, forged maintenance logs, pressure to minimize delays. She stored Derek's comments on her encrypted drive. The story was building, but she knew that each entry was another stone in the pocket of her career, dragging it toward ruin if she wasn't careful. 2 weeks later, the cracks widened further. On a flight to Denver, a passenger collapsed mid-air. The crew rushed to provide medical aid. But when Selena called for the onboard emergency kit, it was missing crucial supplies. Later, she discovered it had expired months ago. At the debriefing, she raised the issue to management. Margaret Sloan, the VP of Operations, smiled tightly and waved it off. "Those kits are costly to replace, and FAA rarely checks them. Don't worry. Captain Drake filed the necessary paperwork. It's already handled." Handled. The word felt like a knife twisting. How many other handled issues had been swept under the rug? Selina lay awake that night, her mind a storm. She thought about the passengers, the families, the children, the business travelers who trusted them. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that dignity wasn't just about respect, but about responsibility. And she thought about her own silence. Was she complicit if she didn't act? Her next pairing with Monica Reyes brought a brief reprieve. Over a quiet dinner during a layover in Boston, Monica leaned forward. I've seen it too. The missing supplies, the shortcuts, and I've seen how they treat you. Selina, I don't know how you keep standing tall. Selina managed a weary smile. Some days, I don't. Some days, I feel like I'm breaking in half, but I can't let them see that. Monica reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Maybe you don't have to carry it alone. Those words sank deep. For the first time, Selina felt the stirrings of something more than isolation, an allyship, a shared resolve. The turning point came during another flight from Atlanta to Denver. Severe turbulence rattled the aircraft, and Drake barked orders with frustration. When Selina suggested diverting to avoid worsening weather, he snapped, "You're not making the calls. Sit there and let me fly." But moments later, the plane lurched violently, passengers screamed, and overhead bins rattled. Selina gripped the controls and corrected the pitch instinctively, stabilizing the aircraft. Drake's silence afterward was louder than his insults. He never thanked her, but the look in his eyes betrayed a truth she had saved the flight. Later, Monica whispered to her in the galley, "Everyone saw what you did, even if he won't admit it." Selina felt a flicker of vindication, but it was fleeting. Her journal grew heavier, filled with stories of ignored warnings, falsified logs, and retaliatory reports. She realized she wasn't just collecting complaints, she was building a case. The cracks were no longer small. They were fractures threatening to break the system apart. And she stood at the center of it, torn between the fear of losing everything and the knowledge that silence could cost even more. Selina Ward had never been one to seek conflict, but she knew the moment was coming. The evidence in her journal, the encrypted drive tucked deep in her bag, it had grown into a burden she could no longer ignore. Every day she flew under Aerosky Airlines. She felt complicit in a system fraying at the edges, and sooner or later, someone was going to force the issue into the open. That someone turned out to be Captain William Drake. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight from Boston to Dallas. Selina arrived early, as she always did. Crisp uniform and calm demeanor, she checked weather reports, scrutinized the maintenance log, and felt her pulse quicken at the familiar signatures scribbled without care. She knew those check marks didn't mean inspections had been done. She knew better now. When Drake strode into the briefing room, he exuded his usual arrogance. "Ward," he said flatly, not bothering with eye contact. "Today we do things my way. No delays, no excuses." Selina met his gaze, her voice measured. "We'll do things by the book. That's how safety works." His jaw tightened. Safety is keeping the airline running. If we start grounding planes for every smudge of oil, we won't have an airline left. She held his stare. If we don't ground planes when they're unsafe, we won't have passengers left. The silence was heavy, broken only when the gate agent announced boarding. Drake brushed past her, muttering under his breath, "You're not cut out for this." The first hour of the flight was uneventful. Selina kept her eyes on the instruments, her hands steady on the controls. But beneath the routine, tension coiled like a spring. When they reached cruising altitude, Drake leaned back, arms crossed. "I've filed reports on you," he said casually, as though discussing the weather. "Management's tired of your grandstanding. You keep this up, you won't last." Selena didn't flinch. "If doing my job by the book is a problem, maybe it's the system that needs changing, not me." Drake's lips curled into a thin smile. "You think you're some kind of hero. You're a liability. Pilots like you don't belong in cockpits, not here, not anywhere." The words landed like blows, but instead of shrinking, Selena straightened. "I belong here, and deep down, you know it." The cockpit went quiet. For the rest of the flight, Drake said little, but Selena could feel the storm brewing. When they landed in Dallas, he made his move. "Standing in front of the assembled crew," Drake announced loudly. "This first officer is insubordinate. She disregards authority. She puts her ego before the operation." The crew froze. Monica Reyes, standing nearby, clenched her jaw but said nothing. Selena felt every eye on her. For a moment, shame threatened to crush her. But then she remembered the passengers stepping off the plane, unaware of the risks they had faced. She thought of Derek Cole, risking his job to tell her the truth. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her that dignity was holding your ground when the world tried to push you down. So she spoke, calm, clear, steady. "What I did was my duty. I will not apologize for ensuring safety." The crew exchanged glances. Some looked away, but a few nodded faintly. Drake's face reddened. "We'll see how long that attitude lasts once Caldwell hears about this." That night, in the sterile quiet of her hotel room, Selena felt the weight of it all pressing in. The threats, the reports, the risk of losing everything she had fought for. She paced the floor, her hands trembling. What if he's right? What if they push me out? She sat on the edge of the bed, gripping her wing's pin. The metal was cool against her palm. Slowly, her breathing steadied, she whispered to herself, "Even if they try to silence me, I know the truth, and I won't bury it." The next morning, Monica found her in the terminal lounge. "Drake's pushing hard," she warned. "He's rallying people against you." Selena nodded. "Let him. I'm not the one falsifying safety. When the time comes, I'll have the proof." Monica's eyes widened. "You've been keeping records." Selena hesitated, then nodded again. "Logs, notes, photos, enough to show what's happening, enough to expose them." Monica squeezed her hand. "Then you can't back down now." The confrontation escalated days later during a flight into Atlanta. Severe crosswinds buffeted the approach, and Drake insisted on pushing through. Selena, analyzing the instruments, knew the risk was too great. She spoke firmly. "We need to go around." Drake slammed his fist against the console. "I said we land," ignoring his rage. Selena disengaged the autopilot and initiated the go-around. The engines roared, the aircraft climbed, and the passengers, though rattled, remained safe. After circling, they landed smoothly on the second attempt. In the gate area, Drake exploded. "You undermined me in front of the entire crew," he shouted. Selena stood tall. "I prevented a disaster. You should thank me," but she knew gratitude would never come. Instead, Drake stormed off to file yet another damning report. Back in her hotel room, Selena stared at her encrypted drive. She thought about how each confrontation brought her closer to the breaking point. Fear gnawed at her, but resolve grew stronger. She was no longer just a pilot fighting for her dignity. She was becoming a whistleblower, whether she wanted to or not. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope for Selena Ward. Each flight carried not just passengers and cargo, but also the invisible weight of her defiance. She could sense the shift in the air every time she entered a briefing room. Some colleagues looked away, others whispered. The rumors Drake had seeded spread like wildfire. She was being painted as the troublemaker, the one who slowed things down, the pilot who thought she knew better than seasoned captains. Yet, under the surface, Selena noticed something else, tiny flickers of recognition. A quiet nod from a junior pilot who had once been shouted down for suggesting a safety check. A hushed word of encouragement from a gate agent who'd overheard Drake's tirades. Not everyone believed the narrative, and those small signs kept her moving forward. Her encrypted drive was growing heavier with each entry: forged logs, skipped inspections, expired medical kits, Drake's reckless decisions. She documented everything meticulously, knowing each detail might one day matter. But the more she gathered, the more the danger mounted. One evening, during a layover in Denver, Derek Cole knocked softly on her hotel door. His face was drawn, his voice low. "They're on to me," he said. "Management suspects I've been refusing sign-offs. Caldwell's office called me in. If I push harder, I'll lose my job." Selena gestured for him to sit. "You've already risked so much. I don't want you destroyed because of this." Derek shook his head. "This isn't just about me. Planes are flying with defects. Selena, sooner or later, something catastrophic is going to happen, and when it does, they'll blame the mechanics or the pilots, never the system." His words struck her like lightning. She had been focused on her own survival, but the storm brewing was bigger than either of them. "Then we can't let it get that far," she whispered. "We need proof they can't bury." Derek slid a flash drive across the table. "Maintenance records, emails, orders to pencil whip. I've copied what I could. Hide it well." Her hands trembled as she took it. This could change everything, or end everything. Derek said grimly. That same week, Monica Reyes found Selena in a quiet airport cafe. "I heard Drake's petitioning to have you grounded," Monica whispered. "He's telling management you're unstable, that you overreact in emergencies. He's trying to push you out." Selena's chest tightened, and management believes him. Monica's eyes flicked down. They want to believe him. It's easier than admitting the airline is rotten from the inside. Selena felt a surge of anger. The idea that truth was less convenient than lies, it was enough to make her stomach turn. But before despair could take root, Monica leaned forward. "There are people who believe in you. I do. Derek does. And there are others, too, watching quietly. You're not alone. Selena." Those words carried her into the next confrontation. It came during a flight to Washington, D.C. Midway through the trip, a warning light flickered on the overhead panel. Drake dismissed it as a faulty sensor. Selena's training screamed otherwise. She double-checked the manuals, cross-referenced the system readings, and realized the warning pointed to a potential bleed air leak. "Captain, we need to run the checklist," she insisted. Drake sneered. "You're wasting time." But Selena pressed forward, flipping switches, confirming readings. When she reached for the fire handle, Drake slapped her hand away. "I said, leave it." Passengers in the cabin had no idea that behind the cockpit door, 2 pilots were locked in a silent war over their safety. Selena's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. If that duct ruptures, we'll lose pressure. People could die." The silence stretched before Drake finally growled, "Fine. Do your damn checklist." The system stabilized after their corrective action, but Selena knew it had been close. Too close. When they landed, Drake stormed into operations, slamming a report onto the desk. Selena followed, her uniform soaked with sweat. Thomas Caldwell himself stood there, arms crossed, with Margaret Sloane at his side. "What's going on here?" Caldwell demanded. Drake pointed at Selena. "She's reckless. She undermines command. She's a liability." Selena drew a breath, steadying herself. "What I am is a pilot who refuses to gamble with lives. Today's warning wasn't a false alarm. If I hadn't acted, we could have had an emergency at 30,000 feet." Caldwell's gaze was sharp, cold. "Do you have proof?" Selena felt the flash drive in her pocket, heavy as a stone. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet." "Then, until you do," Caldwell said icily. "Remember your place." The dismissal cut deeper than Drake's insults. It was a reminder that the system wasn't broken accidentally. It was designed to protect itself. That night, Selena sat alone in her hotel room, Derek's flash drive glowing faintly on the desk lamp. Her mind churned. If she revealed its contents too soon, they'd fire her, bury her, discredit her. But if she waited too long, something catastrophic might happen. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, not out of weakness, but out of the crushing knowledge of what lay ahead. She whispered into the empty room, "How much more can I carry?" But beneath the grief, something else sparked a fire that would not be extinguished. She thought of the passengers, the mechanics silenced, the junior pilots watching quietly, the children who looked up at the sky and dreamed. And she knew the storm was here. But so was her resolve. Selena Ward awoke before dawn in yet another hotel room, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Her body was exhausted, but her mind churned with relentless questions. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the moment in the cockpit when Drake had slapped her hand away from the fire handle. The memory sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't just hostility anymore. It was sabotage cloaked as authority. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the encrypted flash drive Derek had given her. The evidence was there, pulsing like a heartbeat, daring her to release it. The next day's assignment was a turnaround flight from Atlanta to Denver and back. Selena tightened her uniform, pinned her wings carefully, and whispered a prayer to steady her nerves. When she entered the briefing room, she felt the room shift. Drake sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other senior pilots who smirked at her. The tension was palpable, a quiet conspiracy in the air. Drake's voice was sharp. "Ward, you'll handle radio today. No deviations, no theatrics. Clear." Selena kept her face calm, clear. The first leg to Denver was quiet, but too quiet. Drake's silence felt loaded. Selena noted every flicker of the instruments, every small anomaly, adding them to the silent ledger in her head. She wondered how many more flights she could endure like this before something snapped. During the return flight, the moment came. Midway over Kansas, a loud clunk echoed beneath the fuselage. Warning lights lit up the overhead panel hydraulic system, pressure dropping. Selena's stomach tightened. "Checklist," she said quickly. Drake waved her off. "It's residual pressure loss. Ignore it." Selena leaned forward, scanning the gauges. "No, it's a line rupture. We need to divert. Drake's face reddened. We're not inconveniencing 200 passengers over a false alarm. Sit back and shut up. Selena's pulse thundered in her ears. This wasn't theory, it was life and death. She gripped the controls. Captain, we are diverting. Drake lunged across the cockpit, pressing his hand over hers. You're not touching those controls. For a split second, it was no longer a disagreement. It was a struggle for survival. Selena locked eyes with him, calm but fierce. If you stop me, you'll kill us all. The silence broke with a violent shudder from the aircraft. The nose dipped. Oxygen masks jolted loose above the passengers. Screams filled the cabin. Selena yanked the yoke, stabilizing the descent while Drake cursed under his breath. She declared an emergency over the radio, her voice steady despite the chaos. Mayday, Mayday. This is Aero Sky for Huavan hydraulic failure, requesting immediate diversion to Kansas City. The controllers cleared them without hesitation. Selena worked through the checklist, hands moving with precision, her training and instinct in perfect sync. Drake, pale and shaken, offered no resistance this time. The emergency landing was rough but survivable. Fire trucks lined the runway. Foam sprayed across the tarmac. When the plane rolled to a stop, passengers erupted into applause, unaware of the war that had raged behind the locked cockpit door. As paramedics boarded, Selena unbuckled slowly. Her hands trembled now that the adrenaline ebbed. Drake glared at her, but his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard. You'll regret this. Later, in the debriefing room, executives descended like vultures. Caldwell's eyes were cold. Margaret Sloane's smile was razor-sharp. Drake told his version first, twisting events into a narrative of hysteria and insubordination. He claimed Selena had panicked, exaggerated the failure, and endangered the flight. Selena waited her turn, then stood tall. Passengers are alive today because I acted. The hydraulic system failed exactly as I identified. If we had continued, we would have lost control. Caldwell's voice was flat. Do you have evidence beyond your word? Selena reached into her bag. Her fingers brushed the flash drive Derek had given her. She pulled it out, holding it up. I do. Records, emails, proof that maintenance has been falsified, proof that safety has been compromised for profit. The room went silent. Sloane's smile faltered for the first time. Caldwell leaned forward. Do you have any idea what you're accusing this airline of? Yes, Selena said firmly. I'm accusing you of endangering lives, and I won't be silent anymore. The executives exchanged quick glances. Drake's smug confidence wavered, but his hatred burned hotter. She's bluffing, he sneered. Selena's eyes locked on Caldwell. Try me. That night, alone in her hotel room, Selena felt the weight of what she had unleashed. She had crossed the threshold. There was no going back. Either the truth would surface, or the system would bury her alive. Her reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar stronger, fiercer, but haunted. Her phone buzzed with a message from Derek. They'll come after you now. Be ready. And another from Monica, proud of you. Whatever happens, you're not alone. Selena closed her eyes, clutching the wings pin in her hand. For the first time in months, she felt clarity cut through the fear. She had reached her breaking point, but instead of shattering, she was sharpening. Tomorrow, the storm would grow, but tonight, she allowed herself one deep, steady breath. She was ready. Selena Ward sat in the sterile conference room at Aero Sky headquarters. the walls lined with framed photos of planes and smiling crews. The air was thick with the hum of the air conditioner and the silent hostility of those who sat across from her. Thomas Caldwell and Margaret Sloane were side by side at the table, their faces carved in stone. Captain William Drake lounged in his chair with an air of smug anticipation, as though he'd already written the ending. The flash drive sat between them, small and ordinary, yet heavier than anything Selina had ever carried. Her voice was steady when she spoke. Inside are records from Aerosky's own system's maintenance logs signed off without work completed, internal memos pressuring mechanics to cut corners, and emails from leadership approving it all. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. You realize you've just admitted to stealing proprietary data? Selina leaned forward. No, I've safeguarded evidence of crimes. The Federal Aviation Administration will decide which it is. A flicker of unease crossed Sloane's face, but Caldwell pressed on. Do you understand what happens if you make this public, the jobs lost, the contracts broken? You'd cripple this airline. Selina's heart thudded, but she kept her tone calm. Better a grounded airline than a mass casualty because of greed. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Drake broke it with a bitter laugh. No one's going to believe you. You're just an ambitious pilot trying to make a name. They'll bury your story before it breathes. Selina met his gaze. Then let's see who the public believes when they see the evidence. The meeting ended abruptly. Caldwell confiscated the drive under the pretense of reviewing the material. But Selina had anticipated that. Derek had made 2 copies, one hidden, one already sent to a trusted FAA investigator, Caroline Hughes. The next days unfolded like a storm ripping through calm skies. Word leaked that an FAA inquiry was underway. Anonymous tips surfaced online, accompanied by whispers that a pilot had broken rank. Crew lounges buzzed with speculation. Some sneered. Others whispered admiration. Monica Reyes sought Selina out in the cafeteria. They know it's you, Monica said quietly. Selina stirred her coffee slowly. Then, it's out of my hands now. But it wasn't. The retaliation was swift. Selina was pulled from her flight schedule pending review of conduct. Caldwell painted it as routine procedure, but the subtext was clear she was being sidelined. Gossip spread that she was unstable, a problem. Derek called late one night. His voice was low, urgent. They've tightened security. My badge was flagged. I don't know how long I'll keep my job. Selina closed her eyes. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have risked this much. I'd rather lose my job than my conscience, Derek said. Besides, you were right to act. The FAA contacted me today. They have the logs. It's real now. Selina, they can't bury it. Her breath caught. So the investigation is moving. Yes. Derek confirmed. But Caldwell will fight back hard. The fight came sooner than she expected. Aerosky's PR machine roared to life, releasing a statement praising their unwavering commitment to safety. Caldwell appeared on news outlets, smiling as he assured the public that minor discrepancies were being exaggerated by a disgruntled employee. Selina watched the broadcast alone in her apartment, fury bubbling in her chest. To the world. Caldwell looked like a calm, seasoned leader. To her, he was the architect of rot. Her phone buzzed with a message from Caroline Hughes. We're holding hearings next week. Your testimony will be crucial. Selina stared at the words. Fear rippled through her. Speaking privately with investigators was one thing. Sitting before officials, cameras rolling, knowing every word could end her career. This was another. She thought of her grandmother again, the woman who had taught her to look at the sky and see possibility, not barriers. She thought of the passengers clapping after the emergency landing, unaware how close they had come to disaster. She thought of Monica's quiet courage, Derek's sacrifice, and the junior pilots watching silently from the sidelines. Her decision crystallized. She would testify the night before the hearing. She sat in her apartment surrounded by her notes, the copies of maintenance logs, and her journal. She flipped through the pages filled with scrawled observations, hydraulic leaks, expired medical kits, Drake's reckless commands. Each word was a scar. But together they told a story that could no longer be ignored. At dawn, Monica knocked on her door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't let you face this alone," she said with a faint smile. Selina accepted the cup, gratitude softening her shoulders. "You've risked as much as I have." "Maybe," Monica said, "but some risks are worth it." The hearing room in Washington, D.C. buzzed with tension. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters scribbling notes. FAA officials sat at the front, stern-faced. Caldwell and Sloan occupied the opposite table, flanked by lawyers. Drake, immaculately dressed, leaned back with smug composure. When her name was called, Selina stood, wings pin gleaming on her lapel. Her palms sweated, but her voice did not shake. "My name is Selina Ward. I am a pilot with Aerosky Airlines, and I'm here because I can no longer remain silent." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed. She began with the Dallas flight, recounting the hydraulic leak she had insisted on repairing. She described the turbulence over Denver, the missing medical supplies, the near catastrophe over Kansas. She detailed the pressure to ignore warnings, the retaliatory reports, the culture of silence. Then she spoke of the flash drive, the records Derek had risked everything to provide. "This is not about one pilot's reputation," she said, her voice carrying. "It is about a system that has placed profit above people. And I will not stand by while lives are gambled away." Caldwell's lawyer objected, calling her testimony unverified. But Caroline Hughes projected images onto the screen emails with Sloan's signature, logs with discrepancies, maintenance requests marked deferred months past due. The room erupted in murmurs. Drake's smugness faded, his jaw tightening. Sloan shifted uncomfortably. Caldwell's mask cracked, just slightly, as the evidence glared under fluorescent lights. By the time Selina finished, the atmosphere had shifted. No longer whispers, but a roar. Reporters rushed out to file stories. Officials whispered urgently among themselves. Selina sat back, her hands trembling under the table. She had done it. She had exposed the truth. But she knew the storm was only beginning. The day after her testimony, Selina Ward woke up to a world that felt both familiar and utterly transformed. The sunlight spilling across her bedroom blinds looked the same, but her phone wouldn't stop vibrating on the nightstand. Messages, calls, social media alerts her story was everywhere. Major outlets had plastered her face beside headlines: "Black pilot blows whistle on airline safety scandal," "Aerosky facing FAA probe after explosive testimony." She scrolled through comments, her chest tight. Some hailed her as a hero, thanking her for her courage. Others dismissed her as an opportunist, accusing her of exaggeration or staging a stunt. She shut the phone off. The noise could wait. By the afternoon, the FAA announced Aerosky's temporary grounding of 32 aircraft pending inspection. Stocks plummeted, wiping billions from Aerosky's valuation overnight. In corporate offices, panic spread like wildfire. Employees whispered of executives disappearing into closed-door meetings, legal teams pulling all-nighters, and Caldwell's temper flaring in bursts behind frosted glass. Selena, however, sat quietly in a cafe near the courthouse, sipping coffee with Monica Reyes and Derek Cole. All three looked drained, shadows beneath their eyes, but there was an undeniable spark between them, a recognition that they had done something that mattered. "You realize they're going to try to spin this as isolated," Derek said, stirring his cup. "Caldwell's lawyers will pin it on maintenance oversight, Sloan's team, maybe even me." Selena nodded. "I know, but the evidence is too wide, too systematic. The FAA can't ignore it." Monica leaned closer. "The public's with you, Selena. They're tired of stories where the little guy pays the price while executives cash bonuses. You gave them a face and a voice. That matters." Still, Selena couldn't shake the weight pressing down on her shoulders. She knew this wasn't over. Truth had been spoken, yes, but truth often comes at a cost. Her fears materialized quickly. Aerosky's legal department filed a motion to discredit her testimony, branding her an unstable employee with a vendetta. Rumors leaked about her personal life, exaggerated and twisted into tabloid fodder. An anonymous email warned her to watch her back. One night, as she walked from her car to her apartment, she noticed a black SUV idling near the curb. The window rolled down just enough for her to catch a glimpse of a man in a suit, eyes cold, phone pressed to his ear. She quickened her pace, her heart thudding. When she glanced back, the SUV was gone, but the unease lingered. She called Derek. "They're watching me." "I'll check with my contacts," he said grimly. "Caldwell's desperate. Desperate men get reckless." The next morning, Selena met with Caroline Hughes at the FAA. Caroline slid a thick file across the desk. "Selena, I won't lie to you. You've put a target on your back. But this," she tapped the folder, "is exactly why we need you. Your testimony cracked open the dam. Now the flood is coming." Inside the file were photos of corroded parts, falsified reports, even a whistleblower complaint from a mechanic at another hub. The pattern stretched far beyond Dallas and Denver. This wasn't negligence, it was culture. Selena exhaled slowly. "So, it's bigger than Aerosky." Caroline nodded. "Much bigger, but you started the fire." The following week brought the first resignations. Margaret Sloan stepped down to spend more time with family, though everyone knew it was the FAA's mounting pressure. Her exit interview leaked. Sloan admitted she'd signed off on deferred maintenance under Caldwell's orders. Reporters swarmed Aerosky's headquarters. Passengers flooded social media with photos of grounded planes, demanding refunds. Advocacy groups called for boycotts. Caldwell tried to appear composed, but his mask slipped in a leaked recording where he raged about that pilot ruining everything. Selena heard the clip on the news and felt a grim satisfaction. The truth had a way of surfacing, but the fight took its toll. One evening, she collapsed onto her couch, exhausted, only to find her grandmother's framed photo staring back at her from the shelf. She picked it up, tracing the edges with her thumb. "I hope I made you proud," she whispered. The next day, she returned to FAA headquarters for a closed briefing. Caroline, stern as always, broke the news we're grounding the entire Aerosky fleet until further notice. Selina blinked. The entire fleet? Yes. Findings indicate systemic violations. This isn't a slap on the wrist. This is a reckoning. The announcement detonated across the industry. Aerosky's stock collapsed further. News anchors described it as unprecedented, a death sentence for the airline unless drastic reform occurs. Competitors scrambled to absorb displaced passengers. Travelers vented their fury online. Caldwell, cornered, tried to blame rogue employees, but when investigators revealed he'd personally signed memos ordering shortcuts, his empire crumbled. Within days, he resigned. Federal prosecutors hinted at charges. Selina watched it unfold with mixed emotions. On one hand, justice was being served. On the other, thousands of innocent employees faced uncertainty, their livelihoods caught in the fallout. At a press conference, she chose her words carefully. This isn't about destroying Aerosky, she told the cameras. It's about rebuilding an industry where safety and dignity come before profit. Every passenger, every crew member deserves nothing less. Her voice resonated. The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Yet in the shadows, not everyone cheered. Captain William Drake avoided public comment, but rumors swirled of him courting lawyers, seeking ways to salvage his career, and the memory of that black SUV lingered in Selina's mind, a reminder that exposure brings enemies as well as allies. Still, she pressed forward. She began speaking at forums, sharing her story with aviation students and advocacy groups. Monica stood beside her at many events, her quiet conviction a steady anchor. Derek, though still under investigation by Aerosky's lawyers, found support from mechanics unions who hailed him as a hero. Together, they became unlikely symbols of a movement. Hashtags spread online, grounded for truth. Pilot with courage, documentaries called, book deals were whispered. But for Selina, the real victory was simpler. Each time she passed through an airport and saw a passenger smile, unaware of the dangers that had once lurked unseen, she felt a deep, quiet pride. She hadn't just grounded an airline, she had forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. Selina Ward stood at the podium in Washington, a year to the day since she first walked up to that gate in Atlanta and was told she didn't belong in her own cockpit. The irony wasn't lost on her. Back then, she'd been dismissed with a sneer, pushed aside, her credentials questioned not because of their validity, but because of the color of her skin. Now she stood in front of lawmakers, industry leaders, and hundreds of journalists, the hum of cameras filling the grand hearing chamber. "Safety is not optional," she began, her voice steady, carrying the weight of all she had endured. "Dignity is not negotiable. If our airlines want to carry the public trust, then every passenger, every pilot, every attendant, every mechanic must be treated as human beings whose lives are worth more than quarterly profits." The crowd erupted in applause. Selina paused, letting it sink in. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about an entire system forced into the light. After Aerosky's collapse under FAA sanctions, Congress had moved swiftly. A sweeping reform bill nicknamed the Ward Act was passed with bipartisan support. It mandated stricter maintenance reporting, whistleblower protections, and diversity training for all airlines. Pilots of color, once marginalized in subtle but crushing ways, began to see doors crack open. Selina knew it was only the beginning. She had seen too much to believe in fairy tale endings. Change, real change, was slow, fragile, and required constant vigilance. Still, she could feel the shift in the air. Derek Cole, sitting in the front row, gave her a small nod. He was no longer just a mechanic fighting shadows. He had become director of safety advocacy for a national union, shaping policy from within. Monica Reyes was beside him, now head of cabin safety training at a new airline that prided itself on transparency and accountability. Caroline Hughes from the FAA was on stage too, her once cautious demeanor replaced by pride at seeing reform made real. Even Captain Harold Bennett, long retired, had flown in from Alabama to watch Selena close this chapter. He leaned on his cane, eyes shining with quiet approval. But not everyone had survived the storm intact. Thomas Caldwell had been convicted of fraud and negligence, sentenced to prison time. Margaret Sloan entered witness protection after testifying against him. And William Drake, the pilot who once sneered at Selena on the tarmac, faded into obscurity. A cautionary tale whispered in training sessions, a reminder of what arrogance and prejudice could cost. As Selena spoke, she let the words flow from a place deeper than triumph. I didn't choose this fight, but I chose not to walk away from it, because if I had, I'd be leaving behind every young girl who dreams of flying but doubts she belongs. I'd be abandoning every passenger who trusts us with their lives. And I'd be betraying the memory of those who suffered because silence was easier than truth. Tears welled in the eyes of many in the audience. The moment wasn't polished theater. It was lived experience, raw and undeniable. When the hearing concluded, Selena stepped outside onto the steps of the Capitol. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, voices calling her name. She raised her hand, not in dismissal, but in acknowledgement. I'll answer one question, she said, because the rest of the answers are in the work we still have to do. A young journalist, barely out of college, asked, Captain Ward, do you forgive them? The people who denied you, who tried to silence you. Selena looked up at the clear blue sky. For a long moment, she was quiet. Then she answered softly, Forgiveness is not about forgetting what they did. It's about refusing to let their hate define who I become. So yes, I forgive them, but I don't excuse them. Justice had to be served, and it was. Her words spread across the evening news, shared in classrooms, replayed on podcasts, quoted in op-eds. Forgiveness without forgetting, justice without revenge. It struck a chord in a country still grappling with its divisions. That night, Selena returned to her apartment in Birmingham. For the first time in months, the silence felt peaceful instead of heavy. She poured herself a glass of water, sat by the window, and looked at the twinkling lights of the city. She thought of her grandmother, of the stories she told about marching in the civil rights era, about dignity carried like armor. Selena whispered into the quiet. We carried it forward. We didn't let it drop. Her phone buzzed, a message from a young black woman in flight school. Because of you, I didn't quit. Thank you. Selena smiled, tears stinging her eyes. That was worth more than headlines, more than laws, more than accolades. That was the legacy. In the months that followed, Selena continued to speak, to mentor, to build. She founded the Ward Foundation for Aviation Equity, providing scholarships and resources for underrepresented pilots. She pushed for mental health programs for flight crews, knowing firsthand the toll the job could take. She advocated for passengers with disabilities, for attendants facing harassment, for mechanics asked to cut corners. And though she could have chosen retirement, she didn't. She returned to the skies. This time not just as a pilot, but as a living reminder that the cockpit belonged to all who earned it. One crisp morning, boarding a flight from Miami to Chicago, a little girl with wide eyes tugged at her sleeve. "Are you really the pilot?" the girl asked. Selena knelt down, smiling. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." The girl grinned. "Then maybe I can be one too." Selena's heart swelled. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As she walked toward the jet bridge, uniform crisp, head high, she felt the weight of the past and the promise of the future converge in that single step. She had been denied, humiliated, and threatened, but she had turned pain into purpose, injustice into reform, silence into a voice that could not be ignored. And as the engines roared to life, lifting her once again into the endless blue, she whispered the words that had carried her through the storm. "Justice is what we do when we are tested." Captain Selena Ward's journey reminds us that injustice often shows up in everyday places in a workplace, at a gate, in a meeting where voices are dismissed. Yet her story also teaches us something deeply practical. Silence allows prejudice to thrive, but courage, even when costly, creates change that ripples far beyond one person. For older generations who have seen both progress and setbacks, this story is a powerful reflection. It tells us that standing firm, with calm dignity, is not just about personal pride, it safeguards others who come after us. Selena did not fight only for her seat in the cockpit. She fought so that every passenger could fly safely, and every aspiring pilot could see themselves reflected in that seat. The lesson is clear. We may not always choose our battles, but we can choose how we respond. Integrity, persistence, and compassion are choices we can make, regardless of age or circumstance. And those choices, though small in the moment, can alter the course of entire systems. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If Selena's story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, dignity, and justice to life.